Parks Victoria acknowledges traditional owners throughout Victoria and pays respect to their culture and elders past, present and future. This episode of Closer to Nature was recorded in Naarm, Melbourne, on the lands of the Wurundjeri people, and in Woowookarung Regional Park on Wadawurrung country. Parks Victoria respects the deep and continuing connection that traditional owners have to these lands and waters, and we recognise their ongoing role in caring for country.
Hey, look at this. Over at Pax Hill, they've just spotted a koala. That's about a kilometre that way.
I remember the first time I saw a powerful owl nearby here, actually, and that was a great thrill. And those moments stay with you because it's not every day that you see something, a wonderful, fascinating species for the first time. So that's what keeps you coming back for more.
The bush is very meditative and a great place to observe and try and relax and unwind. They call it the green script, and it's just a beautiful spot for anyone that loves being outdoors.
Spending time in nature has significant physical, mental and social health benefits. There's great evidence that shows that visiting a park really helps reduce levels of anxiety and depression and increase life satisfaction broadly. And the social benefits, because parks also facilitate an opportunity to be out in nature with other people, either in a group. Because of the facilities and the open space, you're likely to have group interactions, or because it gives you an opportunity to be with people doing a similar thing, even if you're visiting by yourself. So the healthy parks, healthy people is a well-known catchphrase that you hear a lot of, and a really important benefit of our parks that we need to ensure that we continue to talk about and to encourage.
Welcome to Closer to Nature, a Parks Victoria podcast where we look at how climate change is impacting our parks and what we're doing to protect them. I'm Dr Mark Norman, Chief Scientist, Conservation and Climate Action at Parks Victoria. In this episode, we'll look at how people interact with nature. Visitors bring benefits and occasionally downsides. Later on, we'll speak with volunteers who are working to restore and rehabilitate their local park. But now, let's look at who's visiting parks.
Hi, my name's Kelly de Bie. I manage the Evaluation, Information and Social Science unit in the Environment and Science Directorate at Parks Victoria. Basically, my unit's interested in all things evidence-based data and management effectiveness.
Kelly and her team gather the sorts of data needed to help Parks Victoria manage and make good decisions.
So we have a team that focuses on social science, a team that focuses on geospatial science, which is our spatial and mapping data, and then a team that focuses on park evaluation, so really understanding how our management is influencing conditions of the values that we care about on the ground.
National parks and other protected areas exist for multiple reasons. They protect special places, they preserve unique ecosystems and wildlife, and they also provide spaces for people to enjoy nature, with benefits for them as we've discussed in earlier episodes. Most of our visitors come from Victoria, but people come from all over Australia and the world to see our iconic landscapes.
Most of our visitors come from Melbourne, whether it's a regional park or an urban park, but about 60 to 65% of our visitation. And then we also have regional Victorians and interstate visitation, and of course our important international visitors.
We want parks to be enjoyed. People come hoping to see wildlife, beautiful landscapes and witness those well-known places like the 12 Apostles and Garryword for themselves. Parks Victoria's role is to manage the tricky balance between protecting these wonderful places and having visitors on those landscapes.
In a well-managed park system, you can try your best to minimise visitation impacts, and there is lots of literature to guide how we do that. However, it also relies on positive visitor behaviours, which is something that you need to foster in a community. So some of our key issues are around access. So obviously, particularly for our national parks, if people are trying to come, they predominantly drive, which means we need increased car parking, which can have a significant impact. And then once people arrive, we need to ensure that people are staying on the paths and tracks that are provided, and making sure they're taking all their litter home. Rubbish is a big one for parks. And also the take only photographs, leave only footprints concept, to ensure that people aren't removing any plants or animals or anything from the park.
Rangers at Wilson's Promontory have told us about visitors who leave brand new tents and camping equipment when they leave, treating them as single-use disposables. Each year our park rangers have to clean up tons of rubbish, ranging from trashed campsites to household rubbish and even industrial waste that can include asbestos that's been illegally dumped. Everyone wants the park to be clean when they visit, and we want people to know that there's a high cost to dumped rubbish.
From a community perspective, if we start just having clear communications on that, and you want to play to social norms. So you want the social norm to be you don't leave litter. And one of the ways we do that is to ensure that there's minimal litter in the park, because we know that if there's litter already present, people are much more likely to leave theirs.
We all want our parks to be pristine, so we need to collectively look after them. Most people do the right thing. It'd be great if everyone did.
So we know from our data that about 95% of Victorians support active conservation in our parks, so that's a really encouraging statistic. And that has been consistent over the last 5 years, so that we feel like that's a fairly solid trend. Also, 60% of it feel that more of Victoria should be protected through national parks, so that's also really positive support for the national park concept and conservation in Victoria.
Wildlife are a much-loved part of our parks. That's why we spend so much of our effort protecting them and conserving their habitat. But sometimes the public show their affection for wildlife in the wrong ways, by feeding them. This seemingly innocent act can be really bad for the animals being fed. For example, let's look at the iconic black swans in Albert Park.
Local staff were identifying that the visitors at Albert Park were feeding the swans, and that this was having some ongoing negative impacts on the swans' behaviour and physiology.
Albert Park is just 3 kilometres from the middle of Melbourne. Lots of people visit for all sorts of reasons, like running around the lake, cycling, walking the dog, or going to the Formula 1 Grand Prix. It's also a really popular spot for picnics, and this brings food that's not great for swans.
They get a condition called angel wing, where their nutrient balance is thrown out. And so it's actually a physiological issue where they can't move around effectively, and just general poor health and impact digestion, because humans tend to feed swans bread, and bread isn't good for the swans or the ducks or any of the other things that people are feeding. And at Albert Park, the other issue, not just on the swans' health but also on their behaviour, was that they were then becoming a nuisance, because that they would approach picnickers and visitors for food. It's teaching that behaviour that the visitors will provide the food, and so that was becoming problematic for people who didn't want that experience, because they were being stalked by swans and ducks while they were trying to have their picnic. And there can be safety concerns then with small children and other things. So the behaviour is problematic both for the swan and for the visitors.
One of our most popular activities in our parks is walking. And while it's appealing to step off the path and dive into the bush, you could be stepping on something really precious.
Trampling can be a really significant issue in our parks for a number of reasons. You might be trampling important values that we care about. Some things like orchids can be quite small and cryptic, threatened plants. You might not know that it's there, but you might be stepping on it. But it's not just the trampling impacts themselves, but also the general disturbance. So trail braiding can be a real problem, because you choose to go this way and I choose to go that way, and then you end up with 3 paths instead. And then the next person who comes along goes a different way. And so that has the trampling impacts, also impacts the sediments and the ground itself. So you just end up having a broader impact footprint than might be desirable in a particular space to ensure that the values are protected.
You might also be bringing something into the park unknowingly, like on the bottom of your shoe, that could have serious impacts on the environment. We'll speak more about that in the next episode. Then, over the top of everything else, one of the increasing impacts on our parks is climate change.
We understand from our data that 60% of Victorians feel that we need to be doing more for climate change and are supportive of Parks Victoria acting to protect our parks in the face of climate change. Certainly there is a community expectation that Parks Victoria have positive action in the face of climate change. Obviously the issue with parks is that they're primarily static, so you can't necessarily move them around very easily. I do think that one of the important things with climate change is the clear messaging, because sometimes the impacts are slow and hard to see. So if we're having issues on, flowering seasons are late because temperatures have shifted, and then that's impacting the animals and the insects that rely on that species, those sorts of impacts can be difficult to observe. So I think it's really important to be telling those stories to help the community connect with those species and understand it. But obviously we do have the fire impacts that are really significant and obvious in parks, and the significant issues caused by the black summer fires. So those kind of impacts are really obvious to our visitors because they couldn't visit it, and when you go to a park post-fire or a forested area post-fire, it's quite a vast and disturbing landscape until things start recovering. And also the flood damage that we've had recently. So that has also had a significant impact in our parks and damaged infrastructure and environment. So I guess some of the things are a bit hard to see and need to be communicated, and some of the things are much more stark and obvious and in your face to the community and to our visitors. So it's important to be really active on the ground to make sure that they're the safe havens that they're going to need to be.
In these challenging times, everybody can help nature in their own way. When it comes to visiting our parks, what can you as a visitor know and do? If you can, volunteering is a great way to help. Volunteers are an essential part of our parks community. So much good work is done by volunteers right across the state. We have many dedicated groups of people actively helping us, and they're known as Friends groups. The Friends of Canadian Corridor are a volunteer group working in parks and reserves along the low forested ranges on the east side of Ballarat. These parks include Woowookarung Regional Park, where we are today.
I'm Joel Ellis. I've been on Friends of Canadian Corridor's committee since 2019. I'm the resident bird nerd. I maintain a powerful amateur research database full of local sightings of powerful owls, and maintain a sightings distribution map. And I also write a Bird of the Month column in our monthly newsletter, Spiky News.
I'm Jo Kelly, and my main role with FOC is to record the koala sightings and ensure that they go up onto the state Victorian Biodiversity Atlas and to iNaturalist.
I'm Jeff Roots. I'm actually Secretary of the Friends of Canadian Corridor. I'm one of the originators when the opportunity came to actually create a regional park here in Ballarat. My task as Secretary is to sort of administer the organisation. I also am the editor of Spiky News.
This Friends group is dedicated to improving the wildlife corridor between these parks and reserves and all the plants and animals that live there.
We do a lot of revegetation of native trees, shrubs and other, and we do a lot of general community engagement.
I think we've proudly planted 2,500 trees, and the community really gets on board behind us. We might have 50 people come to help us plant those trees, and it's a welcoming group, and the community are behind us. They come to our general meetings and talk to us about their worries.
We're standing here with Jeff, Jo and Joel, all members of the Friends group, at this beautiful lookout.
You might hear some galahs behind us. There's plenty of bird life, currawongs, fantails, and plenty of other species and mammals possibly, but they're more nocturnal.
The forest has regenerated since the gold rush days, and what we see here around us at the moment are not very aged trees. Some are koala habitat. We see xanthorrheas, which is Australian grass trees. They're very spectacular to look at. They take a very long time to grow, used for various purposes. And there's an undergrowth of some native grasses. Just as I look around, a couple of introduced species and plenty of litter on the floor for habitat.
And when I look out to the northwest, I'm actually looking down into the centre of Ballarat. We're about 3 kilometres from the centre of Ballarat, which is one of Victoria's great regional towns. We're in a forest area that runs north-south on the east side of Ballarat, and just below us is actually a former blue gum plantation which is now in its 12th year of regeneration. The trees are growing up through it, the understories are coming through, and it's actually regenerating in a really strong way. It's a great sight to see.
Jeff, Joe and Joel and other members of the Friends group spend a lot of time out here.
It does consume quite a lot of time, but then it's a really enjoyable process. It's something you do willingly. I don't see it as work, I just see it as engagement. So sometimes I'm out here enjoying myself walking. I'm also plotting the next move and things like that. The Friends actually have a sort of a mantra of advocate, educate and activate. And if you take those 3 sort of pillars, that actually determines what sort of activities we do. And so in advocate means that whenever a council or a government actually comes out with some sort of new policy or needs a response, we respond to everything we can in a positive and a sensible way. That puts us at the decision table. So that's an advocacy role. I think as an educate role, Spiky News goes out to 1,176 subscribers as of last week. And that actually tells the story, and that actually engages a whole lot of other groups. It's about 80 associated community groups with us, so it gets distributed on, and we don't know where it goes after that. But what we do know is we get quite a lot of inquiries from the media. We don't go to them, they come to us. We tell good stories and we can usually round up something. So that's the educate bit. And the activate, well, others have spoken about tree planting and koala spotting and powerful owl spotting and all those sort of things. That's where people can be active in actually looking after the corridor and the park and the general environment.
We're very actively involved in tree planting and revegetation, thanks to the great work of Jeff and the committee. And we've got ongoing plantings annually, and bit by bit we fill up the former plantations with native re-veg. And we're really excited because we feel Woowookarung Regional Park is in a good spot, but it's only going to get better with the potential that lies in the forest community maturing and with that bringing a whole suite of new fauna and naturally as the forest ages.
And they don't work alone. They regularly team up with community groups, both large and small.
There are some key groups, and probably to identify the Field Naturalist Club of Ballarat is just a repository of great knowledge, environmental knowledge. Birds Australia, Birds Ballarat. The Friends actually sponsor some smaller groups, Friends of Harry Lavery, Bushland Reserve, other places where locals actually work on small areas. So it's really diverse, the number of people and the way people actually engage.
All 3 have ended up friends of the Canadian corridor through a shared interest in conservation and a desire to do more to help nature.
And I thought, well, if I can support in some way, then that might do some good, both then and into the future.
It's very rewarding just to know that you're making a positive difference and inspiring a passion in people and getting fauna and the environment, plants and so forth on the conscious of the community, and that kind of motivates them to take an interest in the environment and to do their bit to improve the local environment as a collective local community.
When we started, it was proposed to sell the land off. It was going to go to some developer. Well, the reality is out there now. There's a whole understory regrowing. There's lots of stuff going in. We've replanted a lot of trees. There's a lot more to go. It's actually recovering forest. So we're in a part of Victoria where the forest and the environment is actually improving and improving well. Here we're standing in 2024, that over 12 years of work here, we've actually made a huge difference. We're in a recovering forest. It's actually protected. It's actually managed well by Parks Victoria. It's got a large community backing for it. And I think there's a legacy to this which will be ongoing into the future. It's for future generations.
Tree planting is a big job for this group, and it starts as soon as the seeds are ready. They work together with the Field Naturalist Club of Ballarat, who head out and collect native seeds and then take them to a local community nursery where they're propagated.
Then as we order trees for the next year and other groups order trees for the next year around the park, they then apply the seeds, propagate the seeds, bring them up, and we get the lovely job of just going to collect these wonderfully grown trees.
While the group is currently focusing on planting trees with local seeds, climate change is increasingly part of their thinking.
At some stage in the future, some of our trees may need to actually have provenance that comes from a little further north, a little drier, a little warmer, and perhaps under a mix of, say, 70-30, we actually start to apply some of that. We're not seeing stress in our trees in the area at the moment. Everything's growing really well. The climate issues haven't hit our park, but probably some of the susceptible varieties such as manna gums, yarra gums, swamp gums in the wetter areas are the ones we will look at into the future as to how we actually deal with those, because they're the ones that will probably be most under threat to start with.
We are in the climate change zone and we all need to adapt to it, and we need to be mindful that we need protection overhead of our trees. We need things that will cool the ground. We need to look after our human species as well as other species.
There's a lot of other benefits from volunteering, beyond doing things like planting trees and collecting seeds. It gives these volunteers time in nature, which is always good for you.
Bird watching, I find, is a pastime that's very beneficial to my mental health, and I believe my fellow hobbyists would attest to that as well. It's beneficial in the sense that you get your time to be with yourself or a small group and gather your thoughts and just put away the stresses of life and be present in the moment, take in your surroundings, a sensory experience of what you see and hear, and that's quite meditative, and it's just a great way to connect with the environment. I remember the first time I saw a powerful owl nearby here actually, and that was a great thrill, and those moments stay with you because it's not every day that you see something as a wonderful, fascinating species for the first time. So that's what keeps you coming back for more. And similar applies as well for sightings of mammals, reptiles, frogs as well. There's many species that doing their best to live their lives, and they might be suffering struggles as well, and they need our help. And that just brings perspective as to whether there's something greater than us that needs our help and our support. And yeah, it's very humbling and a reminder of there's much more to life than the human experience.
Urban parks in our cities and regional areas are there to be enjoyed. We're fortunate that natural places still exist in our highly populated communities. It's important to respect these areas and see them as critical homes for native species.
can go for a walk, you can go for a run, you could go for a ride. Just being in nature has benefits. You may have heard the term forest bathing is a bit of a catchphrase these days. They're studying the wellbeing and restorative benefits of being in a forest environment. There's mindfulness walks where you can have guided or unguided mindfulness walks where you're focusing on absorbing the natural environment around you. And even short visits into green space generally have been shown to have benefits. So even if in your lunch break you've got time to spend 5 minutes down in your local green space or urban park, the benefits of that on restorative benefits for your cognitive function are quite high.
During the Black Summer bushfires of 2019 and 2020, around 15 million hectares of eastern Australia was burnt. That's an area more than twice the size of Tasmania. It's estimated that billions of native animals were lost and the lives of hundreds of threatened species were made much harder. There was a massive outpouring of grief and support from the community. It's from events like this that we see how much people value wildlife and the natural world. We'll talk more in future episodes about the increasing frequency and intensity of bushfires and other natural disasters due to climate change, and how we can all get engaged and involved in better supporting nature. Another major recent event demonstrated how important nature is or can be. During the COVID-19 epidemic and lockdowns, many Victorians were restricted to an area 5 kilometres from home and only allowed to socialise in small numbers outdoors. People rapidly discovered how special their local parks were, even the tiny ones. People visited like never before. Visitation at some of our parks increased by 6,000%. On their daily outings, people started noticing the birds around them, the mudlarks on the sides of the road, the magpie morning choruses, flocks of passing cockatoos or darting skipper butterflies in their gardens. Bird watching suddenly became a big thing for many people for the first time. Not only do parks protect the best of nature, but they also do us a whole lot of good, for both physical and mental well-being. Spending time in nature also helps us think about being more sustainable and kinder to the creatures around us and this wonderful planet. Thanks for listening to Closer to Nature. I'm Mark Norman, and thanks to my guests Dr Kelly de Bie, Joe Kelly, Joel Ellis and Jeff Roots for talking with us. In our next episode, we'll learn a bit about the threats posed by invasive pests and weeds, both on the land and in the sea.
But what we've seen in recent decades is a real expansion and explosion in their numbers. We've got millions of urchins in the bay that are over-consuming our reef ecosystems. They're creating these areas called urchin barrens, which are basically these large areas that should be covered in marine plant life. Now they're basically rock.
Closer to Nature is a Parks Victoria podcast. This episode was produced by Liz McKenzie, Ben Francischelli, Paddy Norton and hosted by me, Dr Mark Norman. Production and sound design by Laura Briley-Newton from Audiocraft and production support from Olivia O'Flynn, also from Audiocraft. We'd love to know what you think, so please subscribe to Closer to Nature and leave us a review wherever you get your podcasts.